Greetings and salutations. Welcome to Knife Chats with Tobias. I'm not sure. You may have watched my video on sales pitches versus reality. It was a rather long video. I think it went on for about 40 minutes or so, maybe even more than that. But there were two things in that video that I left out. One of them being half stops and the other one being blade etches. I'll take on blade etches in a future video. For this video, I am just going to be talking about half stops because that annoys me more. And it's the way people push half stops as if it's a sign of quality as opposed just to a feature. This knife has a half stop. It's going to be a better knife for you, blah, blah, blah. And that's a sign of a quality built knife because it has a really good half stop. And I've addressed this in passing in numerous videos that no, a half stop is just a half stop. It isn't a sign necessarily of a quality made knife or anything of this sense. It doesn't mean that you have a more expensive knife on your hand because it's got a half stop, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you have a quality built knife either. Now, before I go on, let me talk a little bit about what I'm talking about when I say a half stop. Now, the half stop is where a blade, the one that most people consider a half stop, is where the blade will snap to the 90-degree position when you're attempting to open or close the blade. Notice how this one will, you pull it, it actually locks there, it stops, and then you have to pull it the rest of the way. And you see, if you push, it'll snap to that spot and then it'll drop. And that's usually referred to as the walk and talk of a knife. The blade stopping at that 90-degree point. And when it snaps there, that's referred to as the talk if it's making any noise or such. This is a Klein tool electrician knives. A lot of electrician knives have a half stop on both blades. Now, the purpose of the half stop, the primary purpose that is usually put into a knife is as a safety feature. That's usually the way it was described. The knife becomes a little safer because if you're doing something like twisting or pushing or cutting improperly, the knife isn't just going to slam all the way closed on you. It'll come to the half stop. It may or may not, depending on how much you are pushing on it. But that's the idea of the half stop. And that's the half stop that most people are talking about is a sign of a quality knife because it has a half stop. This is a very inexpensive, or was a very inexpensive knife in the day, so I don't know why it would be considered a quality knife, but it did have a very good half stop. Now, back here is a Northfield unexcelled toothpick, and it has what I like to refer to as a lazy half stop. So when you go to close the blade, it loosens at the top. It doesn't snap into position, but it loses tension against the back spring. So in this area, if you notice, the blade will stop, but it doesn't really stop. It doesn't sit there and get locked. But at the same time, if you push on it, it breaks and it stops and it gives. Now, obviously, if you're doing something really crazy with it, it could continue to swing all the way around and close on your hand. But most of the time when you're doing something like that, it's, you can push on that and see it gives. It stops right there. It's not going to go all the way around, and then you can close it. So you can close it one-handed safely if you know what you're doing. And these are the kind of knives that are very easy to just push on the side of your leg, keeping your fingers away from the channel, and the knife will snap closed. This is actually the kind of half stop that I prefer on a knife. I'm not as crazy about the one that, that is a full half stop. That I like to call this a lazy half stop. Now, not all knives have that. For instance, this Boker pen knife, it really doesn't have a definitive half stop. It rolls all the way around. Now, it still, at any given point, it isn't going to be closing on you. It has to get to a certain point, which is the case with a lot of knives, somewhere around the 45 to 30 degree mark. Eventually the blade will just drop. But for a long portion of it, you can control the blade. It doesn't close right away, but it's really not a lazy half stop. You don't feel tension on it wanting to close until it gets to a certain point, and then it will just naturally drop. See? And you see that on some knives too. Actually, you see it on quite a few knives. It's not the same as a lazy half stop because you don't feel that point where it just gives. You can feel that on this knife. As you're closing it, you will feel it's like somewhere around here to here. It's in a neutral position. There's no tension on it at all, and it's just, you can just feel it. You can't really see it, but you can feel it. And then again, at a certain point, you can feel some serious tension, and you have to push it beyond that, and then it will close. You don't have the same pushing here. There's no real push. It's just gentle movement, 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 pop. On this one, though, there's a point where the blade gives. And it has everything to do with however they bend the tang back here, however they position and everything. With the half stops, it is definitely squared off. See how that is squared off? And that's why the blade will come to a half stop, because it's flat against the back spring. So that's the way the true half stop works versus the lazy half stop works, and the knife that just is completely rounded all the way around with no real half stop at all. And different people will like knives with different kinds of half stops. I'm pretty much indifferent to any of them. I do prefer the one that is on here the best, but I don't mind this one either. The thing is when you get a knife and you use it a little bit, you kind of get comfortable with the way that stop is working, and that's kind of the way you'd like to see it. But if you know your knives, then you also know, okay, like electrician knives, they're going to have that half stop. It was seen as a safety feature, but I got to tell you, which is the more expensive knife? Which knife has more quality into it? The Northfield, not this Klein tool that was made by Camillus. It doesn't have the same quality in the build as the Northfield does, and that's the point I try to make about this. It isn't that half stops are good or bad or indifferent. It's just a feature. It was originally seen as a safety feature, but I don't think anyone ever really considered it as a sign of quality. It's like, oh wow, that knife has a half stop. It's got to have some really good quality going on with it. And if that is the case, then here we have this Rough Rider with a half stop and a very, very weak back spring. I mean, the pull on this thing is like a 3 or a 4, and I would not say that's snapping it to position. Because the back spring is so weak. Or we have this one that has a pull of about a 5 or a 6, and it just rolls. It rolls all the way around. There's no half stop at all. But once you get to there, right there, it'll drop really well. And are you telling me this one with the weak back spring is a better quality knife? Maybe you think it is. I don't, because it's the back spring is just a little too weak. And if it had a little bit stronger of a back spring, I wouldn't have to worry as much about the blade closing anyway. This one, it holds in place really good. This one, see the difference? Yeah, they can both move, but this one just rolls around nicely. This one kind of jerks around, and I got to still move it most of the way. So I don't know. That's just me. And you can see this in other knives here too. I mean, Novelty Knife Company, Barlow. Look at that. The quality is still in that blade. Some kind of cheap 420. Look at the grind going on there. You see the saber grind over here, flat on this side. But it's got a half stop, so it's definitely a quality built knife, right? Both blades have a half stop. This was probably about a $3 or $4 knife at the time. These go for $7. It's got a better blade on it, at least. Made in China as opposed to the U.S. But would you consider that a top quality knife? I don't think so. And here we have, let's look at this, Great Eastern again. No half stop. The other one, the toothpick didn't have a half stop. And these are in their Northfield line, okay? Northfield is their higher line of knives from Great Eastern. This is in the Titty Ute line. It's got a really good half stop going. So, which is the better knife? You can call it, I call it even on these two, on these three. And primarily because, well, I think the only reason this knife has a half stop is because the original version of it had a half stop and they just kept the half stop in there. So, and that's something you will see in certain patterns of knives. They will just happen to have a half stop. A lot of Barlows have half stops. Quite a few of them. But you also see half stops on all sorts of old, cheap knives, especially the ones that have like the shell handles and stuff. Man, there's so many of these that had a half stop. And to say that these were a well-made, top quality knife, well, yeah, look at that. It's got the added feature of blade wobble galore. So, and these knives, these were sold on a card. There'd be a card in your tackle shop with like 12 to 14 of these on the card, and they'd be sold for $1 or 50 cents or something like that. But they got a great half stop. This one's relatively good. See that? Hardly any wobble. But you know what? With time, they'll break in, and they develop the wobble of a lifetime. Because they weren't really meant to last more than a season anyway. These are by Colonial, by the way. You know, your old Colonial fish knife. Would you say that's a quality made knife? I don't think so. So there you have it. That's my take on half stops. I should have shown this one too. I guess only half of this knife is a quality made knife, because this side kind of has a lazy half stop, but this side has a true half stop. So this end of the knife, this end over here, is a quality made knife. The other end of the dog bone jack, I don't know, they just decided to cheap out on it and didn't put in the half stop. See what I mean? So that's what I'm talking about with half stops. They're just a feature. They don't really mean that the knife is a better knife than some other knife that doesn't have a half stop. If it's something that you really like in a knife, then I think it's a good thing that a company will let you know that the knife has a half stop. But for me, it's never been a major selling feature for me. Just because a knife has a half stop doesn't mean I'm going to buy it, and just because it doesn't have a half stop doesn't mean I'm going to ignore it. It's just a feature. Let me take just a second to thank you once again for dropping by and spending a few minutes here at Knife Chats with the Pious. I really do appreciate it, and I do appreciate any comments that you leave. So please remember to give me that thumbs up, and also don't forget to subscribe and ring that notification bell so you'll know when the next episode is up and running. Thanks again for dropping by. Really do appreciate your time here.